All right, so the first section of the 1920s unit is about the impact of the last unit on the current one. So this is basically the impact of the 1920s, the impact of World War I on the 1920s. So you're going to identify the political, economic, and social effects of World War I in the 1920s. Can everyone in the room actually hear me? I'm speaking at the screen. Can you guys hear okay? Okay. All right, so this is a really, really interesting segment of this unit because it's about a flu pandemic that happened in 1918 to 1919. Obviously, I'm sitting here giving this lecture wearing a mask. I have a group of students on a computer, not in this room. Yes, sir. And then a group of students in the room wearing masks as well, 6 feet apart, because this is a aerosol, basically spread virus. In 1918, 1919, the flu is both aerosol spread and droplet spread. So you may have heard in the very beginning of the pandemic, masks don't work. No one should wear a mask. Did any of you hear that? Yeah, you did. That's because that is sort of true about the flu. And so the flu, you can wear a mask, but if a droplet of your mucus or whatever hits a surface, then you can touch that, you can still get sick. So masks are less effective for the flu, although they do help. Coronavirus, the desks that you have to clean, things like that, not as dangerous as the flu, for example. And so the masks are much more effective because most of it is just through air droplets. They're the air floating around. So there's a difference between the two viruses. I mentioned in the slides that the flu theoretically came from chickens in China. It was Wuhan province in China, which is also theoretically where the current coronavirus came from. You may notice that's the H1N1 influenza virus. That's the swine flu. Do you guys remember the swine flu pandemic a couple years ago? No? It was when you guys were little kids, there was a swine flu pandemic. Probably, oh gosh, you would have been very little. I think it was in 2009, something like that. So in any case, this same virus caused the flu pandemic in 1918, 1919. And so it's just one version of the flu. And so basically, I'll show you an image in a second. The flu jumped species. That's why it's called the swine flu. It went from birds to pigs to people, basically. And as that happens, the virus generally becomes more deadly. It's likely that what happened with the Spanish flu, and I'll explain the name in a second, is that workers in China went to the United States, they emigrated, they worked on the railroad on the West Coast, spread it amongst the population. The US is mobilizing for World War I. They all end up in Europe, basically these American soldiers and some of these laborers. They spread it to all the European powers, then come back home to the United States, and the US becomes the center of this pandemic as well as being the center of the current pandemic. The biggest difference is the number of dead. So 5% of the world population died. And that's a remarkably high number of people. I don't know if you guys, so you've got 7 billion people in the world now. I don't have a calculator brain myself, and nor am I looking at my phone. And so I can't exactly come up with that calculation quickly, but it's a huge number, millions and millions of people. Okay. So this is just, not that you need to see this because you understand it, this is how viruses spread. So this is something I included in previous years. But basically, again, it's about the process of the virus spreading in close proximity to people and animals and getting spread around. This video is awesome. It's about the flu pandemic. I would play it for you now, but I can't get the audio to go through this speaker using this computer. So watch it at home. It's from the CDC, by the way. So getting back to the focus question. Political, economic, and social effects on World War I. This isn't a political effect. There are no countries involved. There's no governments involved. It's not something you're going to think about in that frame. You could absolutely argue it's a social effect. What was the other one? And, because lots and lots of people get hurt and they get killed, they die, it has an impact on the world. And that's the one you should probably put it under. So the first slide, when you're writing your focus question, maybe put down a bullet that says social effects of the war equals the Spanish flu. Or maybe right now, if you're listening to this or watching it, you could write that down on a piece of paper and you've got some of your pre-writing done for your thesis sentence on the claim. So again, the Spanish flu is a social effect of the war. And that's a box you can put it in to help you write your answer. Does that help? Okay. So let's look at the second one. What box we're going to put this in? Economic, social, or political? So it's got the word labor, it's got the word union, the phrase union rights in it. So right off the bat, because I know that labor is about working, and I know that working is about the economy, I know this is about the impact on the economy that the war had. Does that make sense, folks? Yes? Okay. So this is also remarkable. At the end of the war, 1 out of 5 American workers went on strike. So I want to repeat that. That's 20% of people. That's 4 million people. 1 out of 5. You got a room. I don't know how many people are in this room. Like 15. So it's 1 out of 5 of you, 3 of you are on strike at any given moment. So think about the impact that had on the world. Like you try to go into a business, workers are on strike. You are a worker. You're on strike because your wages haven't gone up at all since the beginning of World War I. Because if you remember, and I'm not sure all of you got this phrase, but the US basically turned its economy into state socialism, which what I meant was the government controlled all aspects of the economy, including the wages of workers. So it's World War I. Why would you ask for a raise? That raise could be used to make bombs to win the war, and you're asking for soldiers to die. The war is over, no holds barred. Everyone is ready to go, and they go on strike, including the police in Boston. So, 1 out of 3 workers are on strike. That's going to have an impact on the world. Imagine the entire Boston Police Department going on strike because they haven't gotten a raise in 4 years. Think about, what do you think is going to happen in the city of Boston? And it's exactly what you would expect. The lights were destroyed. People were, stealing things from various stores, and it was just a mess. And then the governor at the time, Calvin Coolidge, fired all the police, literally all of them, and prohibited government employees in Massachusetts from going on strike. So if you've ever wondered, why can't teachers go on strike? You probably haven't. But teachers can't go on strike. It's because Calvin Coolidge, who the bridge in Northampton is named after, stopped the Boston police from going on strike for higher wages and fired them all and replaced them with new police who are loyal to him, basically. But so all of these strikes, they're basically crushed. There's almost no gains by workers in the 1920s. And this is about the steel and coal strikes. This is a reenactor about Calvin Coolidge, similar audio issue that I can't play it for you now. Okay, so last one was an economic impact. This one you could argue is a political impact. So slide 1, slide 2, slide 3. Hey, I'm done. I can write my essay. No, or my focus question. Not quite. So the 1920s Red Scare is basically about the fear of communism after World War I. So it's almost entirely about the fact that communists want to abolish private property and to take the wealth of the wealthy and give it to the state. And so with the Soviet Union being created out of the Russian Civil War, you have a situation in which wealthy Americans are terrified of communism. And many communists were absolutely thrilled about the Soviet Union being created. And some of them mail bombs, to people like the Attorney General, small things like that upset other people. So the anarchists mail bombs to the Attorney General, and then immigrants are scapegoated. Do you guys know what the word scapegoat means? Yeah. So immigrants are scapegoated, in particular Italians. I'm personally of partial Italian ancestry, so this particularly offends me because, self-centeredness. But Niccolo Sacco and Bartolomeo Vanzetti, 2 Boston shoe factory workers who are anarchists. They have a bunch of bombs and literature in their, apartments, are arrested and sent to the electric chair because they're basically accused of being communists, and that's it. There was a bunch of folks who sent a letter bomb to the Postmaster General in Boston. They looked for people that looked Italian, which, if you've ever been to the North End in Boston, it is the place where there's more cannolis than you can walk. You'll trip over a cannoli as you go down the street. So there's plenty of folks in that category. And they're executed because of their ethnicity, for being Catholic, for being Italian, for being the wrong kind of politics. So again, what are the political impacts? If you say you're a communist, you can be murdered by the state for being a communist. So it really suppresses freedom of speech and political views in the United States in the 20s. So again, we've got the social impact of the Spanish flu. Lots of people died, 5% of the world population. You've got the what was the last one? The worker strikes changing the economy. People are trying to strike for their rights. They get defeated, basically. And then people politically who want to be more left-wing, in particular communists, are prevented from doing so because the state will execute them for doing so. You guys getting a sense of the 20s? Let's see. This is another great video about the fear of immigrants in the 1920s. This is the president who gets elected after Woodrow Wilson. His name is Warren G. Harding, and I just want you to take a close look at his eyebrows. They're magnificent. So he basically believes that the era before World War I had no conflict, and he wants a return to normalcy. He bases this view not on history, but frankly wishful thinking, and he promotes, I'm not a huge fan of Warren Harding, I don't know if you can tell. He basically promotes a return to laissez-faire economics in general, and also the suppression of the gains made for African Americans, equality of women. He wasn't a fan of women's suffrage, and he didn't believe in the League of Nations. So he's pro-business, he's anti-immigrant, and he doesn't believe in political conflict, and it's his attorney general that basically makes the Red Scare happen. So kind of suppresses the communists in the United States. So this would be both a social impact of World War I, so the way that people have to behave, as well as a political one, because you've got a US president with new policies. Does this make sense? Okay. The new role the US takes after World War I. We become the world's bank, effectively. We're the only country that's a major power in World War I that doesn't actually fight over in Europe, because the United States is not in Europe, conveniently for it. So all the other countries in the world basically start to owe money to the United States, which sounds great, unless something bad happens to the bank. So, you get a loan from the bank, all well and good as long as the bank stays open, and there is no stock market crash in 1929, and the entire international system gets brought down because the US economy is the basis of it. So I'll repeat this one. The US becomes the bank of the world, effectively, the loan agent of the world, and that's because they're the only country that's left after World War I that isn't totally destroyed. And that's an economic impact of the war, right? Got banks in it. So again, the US gets to be the creditor of the world. They get to loan money to everybody, and that's an economic result of the war. And last slide, globally, what changed? No more monarchies. Or not really true, but lots of monarchies in Europe are gone. The Kaiser of Austria-Hungary, the Kaiser of Germany, the Tsar of Russia, the King of Serbia, the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire, the Tsar of the Bulgaria, all of them are gone. There's a bunch of exiled monarchs of Europe who no longer have thrones. The idea of the state started in 1648, the idea that countries have borders. That's basically about which monarch sits on which throne, they have rights. It's all gone. Basically World War I is so destructive that people have to think of new ways to organize the world and organize their societies. This is the biggest change between the modern era and the time that came before it is the First World War. So it's a political change, it's an economic change, it's a social change. In a sense, it's a global revolution that's a result of it. That's all I got.